The Reformation was one of the major events that led to, it started the modern era. So we want to sort of assess the impact of the Reformation across society. Of course, culturally and religiously, this was a huge shift. Before this, in Western Europe, really since the 5th century AD, there was only one church, the Catholic Church. There was the Orthodox in the East, but now all of a sudden you have this explosion of different kinds of churches: the Anglicans, the Protestants, the Anabaptists, the Calvinists. Today, there's literally thousands of different varieties of Christianity, and it really starts here with Luther. And that led to, in some ways, a division in Europe. If we were to look at this map in 1500, all of this would still be Catholic. But now you've got Lutherans and Calvinists and Anglicans and Anabaptists and other groups all across Europe. So, in some ways, this really makes Europe less unified than it was before. You did see, as a result of the Reformation, an increase in education. You have the Jesuits building schools and arguing that people need to be better educated to defend the Catholic faith. And then you have Calvinists and Lutherans and other Protestants who said that people need to learn to read the Bible. And so you did see a gradual increase in literacy. A lot of this, too, has to do with the printing press. But the cultural desire and need to have a literate society kind of is rooted in some ways in the Reformation. It did lead to a lot of conflict too, though. From the Reformation on through the 17th century, you see a series of wars of religion. You've got the 30 Years' War, which was one of Europe's worst wars, really, until World War I. There were wars of religion in France, as well as the expulsion of Catholics out of England under Anglicanism. And these wars, as technology progresses and you move away from chivalry and knights, get increasingly bloody. During the 30 Years' War, for example, roughly a third to a half of the German population was killed through war or famine. So this leads to more conflict as well. The status of women in these movements, as big as the Reformation, sometimes changes and sometimes doesn't. And here you see a little bit of both. Early on, a lot of Protestant leaders saw women as an opportunity to expand their ideas. Women taught, wives taught their children how to read and what to believe. Luther's wife, Catherine von Bora, a former nun herself, was often with Luther and helped him develop some of his theology. But by the end of the Reformation, you saw women kind of go back to their former status. And some people argue that the women actually lost some potential of freedom and independence in the Reformation. Remember, going back in the Middle Ages, if you wanted to become a woman who didn't marry and wanted to learn to read, you could become a nun, and that was a viable option for you. But the Protestants argue you didn't need nuns or clergy, and therefore all women should just sort of be married. So put kind of women in the more traditional status by the end. Politically, you see across Europe sort of shifts into what we might think of as a more modern era. Kings start to consolidate their power even more than they had at the end of the Middle Ages. This is where you start to see kings that we think of as absolutists. They can choose their own religion and make state-run churches like the Anglican Church. States and the power of governments increased, as did senses of nationalism. Without the Catholic Church being the one binding thing that unified people in Western Europe, now they start identifying themselves as members of a particular country or state. And the Catholic Church continued to lose some of its authority. Now it's lost the religious authority that it held over a significant number of people in Europe with the rise of Protestant churches. And it'll continue to lose political authority as well. And this really paves the way for future changes too. It's not long after this, as we get into the 16th and 17th centuries, that you see other changes. People not only challenge the Catholic Church, but they challenge traditional ideas about science and the place of the man in the universe. We're going to see the scientific revolution, and after that, the Enlightenment. And with the Enlightenment comes revolutions like we saw in France and the United States. So this is a huge movement that has repercussions leading well into today.